Hey guys, Jesse here, and today I want to take a look at something a little bit different. As I mentioned in some previous videos, I've been getting back into gaming, and that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to be making a lot of gaming videos, but this particular item is kind of special to me, and I've wanted it for a very long time. It is the Sega Genesis Mini. I've been wanting this thing ever since it was announced, but I didn't want it for the price they announced it for. Don't get me wrong, it's a fair price, but I did want to wait till the price dropped, and it never did. And these things sold really well. So you can't even find them in, well, it's hard to find them in shops, especially with the whole COVID thing going on as well. But I did get this one for a good price, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But in any case, I finally have one. I wanted to make a video on this no matter what because I wanted to get my thoughts on it. And yeah, so here it is. Now, the reason why this is so special to me is because I have a kind of a history with the Sega Genesis. First off, it's my favorite console of all time, bar none. I love the Genesis. And yeah, when I was a kid, my first console was actually the Super Nintendo. My dad got it for me from a pawn shop with two games, Jurassic Park and Super Mario World. Can you guess which one I played first? It would determine my opinion of the Super Nintendo. I was really into dinosaurs and Jurassic Park. That's right, I played Super Mario first. No, I played Jurassic Park first. That game is ass. It is absolutely terrible. And I hated it so much, I didn't even bother to play Super Mario World. And my conclusion was that the Super Nintendo sucked ass. The pawn shop told my dad that if he doesn't like the Super Nintendo, just bring it back and he'll get a full refund. So I told my dad, yeah, Super Nintendo is ass. Please return it. So he did, and I was out of a console for a while. My first real console was the Game Boy, but my first home console was definitely the Super Nintendo. So yeah, I didn't have a home console for a while, but my friend across the street had a Sega Genesis, and some of the older kids that my mom's friends' kids were, I know it's a weird sentence to say, but basically I was surrounded by Sega products. They all had Game Gears and Genesises, Genesi, whatever. So really, I grew up playing Genesis. I would go to my friend's house across the street and play all the Genesis games, Sonic, Rocket Knight Adventures, Vector Man, all that stuff, and I loved it. So when it came around time for me to ask for a new system, my little kid brain didn't ask for the Genesis. For some weird reason, I just accepted whatever my parents gave me. Even when they asked me specifically what I wanted, I just kind of said whatever. But I knew I wanted the Genesis. I don't know. I was a really stupid kid. But either way, my dad ended up getting me a PlayStation. And I love that thing. So it all worked out. But I always wanted a Genesis. So when high school rolled around and I had my own money, I went to the mall and bought myself a Model 1 Genesis. And I still have it. And all the games and stuff. And I'm still collecting games for it. So speaking of which, here it is. It's a lot heavier than I remember. It's not like overly heavy, but yeah, heavier. So yep, here's the Mini. Here's my Model 1 Genesis. As you can see, it is about a quarter of the size of the original Genesis. It's so tiny. I love it. I don't know why this power section is a little like pinkish. I don't know if the original release of the Genesis was this color. Mine's red. Mine's technically like the third revision of the Model 1, whereas the first revision has this high definition graphics printing up here, and mine obviously doesn't. But Model 1's a Model 1, definitely the one you want if you want an original one. But you could get this instead because this is actually really fantastic. But as you can see, very faithful recreation of the original Genesis. So let's take a look around it, and yeah, I'll give you my thoughts on it, the games, and the controller, etc. So here we go. On the left side here, you've got the volume slider, which actually moves. That's bonus points. There's no actual headphone jack. This is purely for show. It doesn't actually do anything, but full marks for authenticity there. You got your on and off switch. That actually does turn it on and off. You've got your reset button, which works. It takes you back to the main menu of this thing. Power light does turn on. You've got two controller ports, and as you can see, they actually printed phones and controller 1 and controller 2. Again, for like full reproduction, it's really good. USB controller ports there, which is really nice, which means you can plug the controllers they give you into your computer and use them for your emulators on your computer. And they're really, really nice controllers. I'll talk about them later, but yeah, the fact that they're USB is just genius. They even modeled the functionality, or at least, you know, the cartridge flaps actually open up, which is great. On the back, you do have the HDMI and micro USB ports. They don't actually give you the charger, they give you the cable, but that's fine. We've got a billion gajillion chargers at this point for USB. And then underneath, just some writing, but I mean, it looks exactly like the underneath of a real Model 1, as you can see here. So, yeah. Even if you weren't going to play on this thing, you just want to model Genesis, this is just perfect. I mean, it's great. I mean, aside from the USB ports and the HDMI stuff, this is like a perfect recreation of the Model 1 Genesis, and it just looks fantastic. And it's built... Oh, that's a bad place to knock it. That's better. It's built really, really well. It feels really high quality. Basically the same material as the original. Not only, by the way, not only did they model the cartridge flaps, they actually modeled the port that the Sega CD is supposed to go in. It obviously doesn't do anything, but in Japan, oh, that's so hard to get back on. One sec. I forgot. I shouldn't have done this. Okay, got it. Ooh, that wasn't too bad. In Japan, they've released something called the Tower of Power, and basically it's a little model Sega CD Model 1 that goes underneath the Genesis. 32X that plugs into the top, a fake Sonic & Knuckles cartridge, and then I think Sonic 1 cartridge that goes on top. So you have like this monstrosity of a Genesis, which they call the Tower of Power. It doesn't actually do anything, like you're not going to be playing 32X games or Sega CD games, but the fact that they've modeled in compatibility for this ridiculous attachment is great. I have no attachment to the 32X or the Sega CD, so I don't really want it. Plus, I think it's going to make it look ridiculous. I know a lot of Sega Genesis fans think it's just a beautiful disaster to see all that crap on it, but the fact that that they made it is just kind of hilarious. And apparently, if you open up the model Sega CD, it has like a cardboard printout of the innards of the Sega CD with a little Sonic CD fake cardboard disc in there, which is just hilarious. So that's fantastic. I don't know if that was actually released in the US, but definitely in Japan they have all that. Anyways, let's talk more about the workings. Actually, no, I'm going to talk about the controller first. That's another hardware thing. So here's the controller. They give you two of them, like I said. It is USB, as I mentioned, so plugging it into your computer just sort of works. And yeah, it's a original 3-button controller, and it's perfect. Almost. So close. It's like 99.9% perfect. So first off, the weight of it's pretty much what I remember. I have an original Genesis controller. It's the Mega Fire with all the turbo switches. So that one's like slightly heavier, but the weight of this is like great. It's made out of the exact materials of the original, so the quality is just super duper high. The buttons feel exactly as they would, like the original. Start button's good. Yeah, it's great. I know a lot of people were upset that they didn't give us the 6-button controllers, but there's not that many games on the Genesis that use the 6-button controllers, at least the ones that come on the system. Basically, it's limited down to the fighting games, and let's be honest, if you want to play Street Fighter 2 or Mortal Kombat 2, you're not going to be playing it on the Genesis. For its time, those ports were good, but now they're released everywhere, and I'm sure everyone's got a better version of Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat 2, and yeah, it's just not ideal to play it on the Genesis. I'm sure there's a few people who want to play it on the Genesis for the nostalgia factor, but I don't really care, to be brutally honest. So this controller is perfectly fine. Plus, I like the form factor of this controller. I have small hands, but the size of this controller is just super duper comfortable. Now, the sort of 0.1% that isn't perfect is the D-pad. Now, the material of the D-pad is the exact same as the original, which is great. And the actual functionality of the D-pad is top-notch for modern retro controllers. But the thing is, it's not an exact replica of the original Genesis controller. It's a little higher up, and the original is a little stiffer. So it's a very minute difference, but as someone who's been playing Genesis, who still plays Genesis today, I can tell that it's just very slightly not authentic. But that doesn't mean it's bad. Don't get me wrong. It's not bad. It's possibly the best D-pad I've used ever since the original Genesis controller. So that kind of tells you the quality on that. But it's perfect. It's great to actually play on. Just not 100% authentic. But no, it's yeah, this is such a nice controller. And they give you two, which is just fantastic. One more thing I want to say about the D-pad is, for some reason in the menus of the Genesis Mini, this is like overly sensitive. You have to just barely tap it to go over one, or barely tap it to go down or up one. If you hold it for even like a second and a half, your cursor will just fly across the screen. In the actual games, it's fine. It works perfectly fine in the actual games, but for some reason, the menus is just a little overly sensitive. That must be a firmware thing or something they could update. But anyways, yeah, let's just take a second to admire this, because there just hasn't been that great of a recreation of this controller until now. It's beautiful. Okay, let's talk about the console and its workings and everything. So how does it play games? Perfect. It's perfect. I mean, there's no other way of saying it. It outputs beautifully in HD. So the high definition graphics actually are accurate now. It's like they had foresight or something, a bunch of seers back at Sega back in the day. But anyways, yeah, it looks great. Particularly, it sounds great. Now, normally when you see these Genesis repro clone consoles or whatever, they're done by At Games, and At Games is awful. If you ever see the At Games logo, you should just run in terror, because their emulation is ass, absolute ass. This is actually made and distributed by, I think, Blaze, and they did a fantastic job. Again, particularly the sound is just great. That's something they just normally don't get right. The Genesis has really unique bass and sort of distortion in its sound. It just sounds unique, and for some reason, a lot of people can't get it right. But they got it right with this. It sounds great, and and the frame rate and the delay and all that is perfect. There is a very slight bit of input lag, but I think that might be due to my setup, since I have mine going through sort of a switcher box, because I have so many damn HDMI things going into my TV that I need a switcher box, and this is one of them going through it. So it's not enough to really detract you from playing a game, but I did die a lot more in Ghouls and Ghosts than I normally do on a real Genesis, and I blame it on the input lag, not my skill. Anyways, the menu is fantastic. You can order it by release date, genre, alphabetically. It's just really nice. It has some nice menu music, very similar to the Nintendo mini consoles, but Sega-fied, a little more edgier, because that's what Sega was all about. And then talking about like some of the output options, you can put it in 16:9 if you're an idiot. You have three choices of sort of borders. You could just have black, which is what I normally do. You could put some weird like future Space Channel 5-esque looking thing in the borders, which I think is not great. And then I think you can have like a grid. So yeah, I don't know if you're really into your border skins for some reason. It's lacking, but it's not really a problem. And you could put scan lines and shit on there, but you know, that's if you just want it to look fake, which is just don't do that. The output from this is so good on an HD TV that putting fake scan lines on it would just look stupid. Let's be honest. But anyways, yeah, playing games on the actual thing are fantastic, and it has great games. I mentioned I would talk about how I got this thing a little bit cheaper. This is actually a refurbed unit, so I got it for about 45 bucks, and it has like a little scratch there, but it works. It works really well, and the controllers aren't all screwed up either. So that's how you can get one of these for cheap. Just look for refurbed units. But the problem with getting a refurb unit is I didn't actually get the box. Otherwise, I'd point out all the games on the back of the box, but I had to print them out upside down. There we go, that's better. So I had to print them out like some sort of boomer, and that's how I'm going to talk about the games here. So the selection of games here is fantastic, like really, really good. It's kind of what you expect and some things that you don't expect. I'll give my opinions on the games here in a second, but otherwise, 42 games for, say, new 60 bucks is just great. So let's go through them. I've pretty much played and beaten all of these games. Yeah, so I think I can give my opinion on these pretty well. Echo the Dolphin, classic Genesis game, very well regarded. It's very, very short if you know what you're doing, but it's very cryptic if you don't know what you're doing, which is how they extended the gameplay of this. It's very beautiful, very well regarded Genesis game. I don't know. I like it, but it does get kind of old after you've played it like 10 times. But it sounds good, looks good. Castlevania Bloodlines, one of the best Castlevania games ever made. Looks great, sounds great. Yeah, it's just really, really good. It's more, how do I say, classic Castlevania, just with better graphics and sounds. Yeah, and not actually overly difficult. I know a lot of Castlevania games can be very difficult, but Bloodlines is definitely like a very good and fair challenge if you ask me. Space Harrier 2, this is a game that I think a lot of people know as well. You're running into the screen shooting people in sort of a pseudo 3D world. I don't know. It's okay. I know a lot of people like it, but I think it kind of sucks that all the games where you have to run into the screen and shoot, the depth perception is all off and wonky, so I'm not a huge fan of Space Harrier 2, but it does play really well on here. Gunstar Heroes, ooh, now that's a really good game. If I recall, it was a bunch of developers who were fed up with their company. I want to say it was Konami, but I don't remember. Basically, they told themselves they're just going to go off and make a better game. So they made Gunstar Heroes, and yeah, it's basically Contra, but more cartoony, and there's a lot of really good weapons in this game, like very good variety. So yeah, glad that's on here. And it's a very expensive game to find. That's another thing about this list. It includes a lot of games that are just overly expensive if you want the actual cartridge. Castle of Illusion, this is a classic Genesis game, and kind of strangely enough, when the Genesis was trying to compete with the Super Nintendo and the regular Nintendo, when they were talking about their mascots, they had, of course, Sonic the Hedgehog. They showed off Castle of Illusion because Disney was really huge at the time, so Mickey Mouse was kind of their other mascot. They pushed the Illusion series of games really hard, and then Michael Jackson, yeah, Moonwalker, which is a fantastic game. Michael Jackson was kind of their third mascot that they pushed. They wanted to show how realistic he looked in the 16-bit era, and he worked with Sega quite a bit. He's in Space Channel 5 by his request because Sega had such a strong relationship with Michael Jackson. But yeah, kind of weird. Sega's icons at the time were Sonic, Mickey Mouse, and Michael Jackson. So yeah, kind of went off tangent there. But anyways, Castle of Illusion, really, really good game. Again, another classic, good graphics. Easy, but not just a walk in the park easy, but still fun. And then World of Illusion is the sequel, and it's just overall better. If you're going to play one or the other, play World of Illusion, but you have both of them here, so no real point in not playing the other one. But it's basically more the same, just with better graphics, and you can play as Donald Duck. Shining Force, another really classic game, also an expensive cartridge. It's basically Genesis's answer to Fire Emblem, but I actually like it more than Fire Emblem. The story's just more interesting, and the combat is, I don't know, it's not as rock, paper, scissors as Fire Emblem. It's got a little more going on. You only get the first one, though, which is kind of a shame because there were like 2 other ones. There were Shining in the Darkness and Shining Force 2. I think Shining in the Darkness is technically the first one. But anyways, really good game. It's made by the people who made Golden Sun. This is kind of their first real big franchise, Shining Force. So the graphical style and the menus and stuff are very Golden Sun. So if you like Golden Sun, you'll like Shining Force. Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. This is basically Puyo Puyo. They just slapped a Sonic skin because they thought Americans just wouldn't like a game called Puyo Puyo, I don't know. And yeah, it's a good puzzle game. I'm not too crazy about it. I like Tetris more, but it's still fun. ToeJam and Earl, this is a weird game. It's a roguelike, essentially, but it's just a weird roguelike. Honestly, I think people finally remember this game because the graphics are so 90s it hurts. But the actual game itself, it's okay. It's actually very confusing because there's like no HUD, there's no menus. It's just kind of weird. I don't know. It's fun for a while, but it gets old after a while. If you ask me, I'm not a huge fan of ToeJam and Earl, but it does look good. It does have style. Thunder Force 3. This is a fantastic side-scrolling shooter. I'm glad they put 3 on here and not 2. I love 2. I have 2. But 3 not only is the better game, but it's so stupidly expensive to get on cartridge. It's just really expensive. So is Thunder Force 4, which is known as Lightning Force in the West. Not Lightning Force, Lightning Force. I don't know. Someone at Sega was smoking a lot of crack when they were putting out games here. But yeah, for some reason it's not called Thunder Force 4. It's called Lightning Force here in the US. And that's also very expensive. But Thunder Force 3, I think is a little more expensive. But it's very, very good. I'm glad it's on here since that's a pretty hard cartridge to get. It's a horizontal spaceship shooter and a very good one. Super Fantasy Zone. I don't like Super Fantasy Zone. I think the original is better, Fantasy Zone on the Master System. Super Fantasy Zone is just hard to look at. It's another horizontal shooter, but it's more in the style of Defender, where you can go left or right and kind of move across the world and destroy stuff. But it's just, for one, it's hard. Don't let those graphics fool you. This game is fucking brutal. But the controls are just stiff. I don't know. You feel like you're a million pounds, and it's just hard to shoot things accurately. And I know a lot of people like Fantasy Zone, but I'm not too crazy about it. Shinobi 3, Return of the Ninja Master. Yes, that's one of the best games on the Genesis. Excellent side-scroller action game. Just overall fantastic. And Shinobi 3 is definitely the best of the Shinobi series. Comic Zone. This is a side-scroller beat-em-up with really, really good graphics. Like, really, really good graphics. But it's actually kind of mundane. I don't know. It's kind of boring. I think people remember it really fondly, and it's considered a classic because of the graphics. It just looks really well, really nice, and it has a really nice style. But overall, the game itself is kind of, again, it's just repetitive, which is a problem with beat 'em ups. Sonic the Hedgehog. We all know Sonic the Hedgehog. I don't really need to talk too much about it. If you ask me, it's actually the worst of the Sonic games, but of the classic Sonic games. But it's on here. You can't have the Genesis without Sonic. I mean, really. Altered Beast, the packing game for the Genesis at some point. This game sucks. By law, you pretty much have to have Altered Beast on anything Genesis related, but let's be honest, Altered Beast is ass. It's a side-scrolling arcade game, and it was one of the first Genesis. I don't think it was the first Genesis game, but it was definitely one of the first, and it's just not good. It's slow. It's short. It's it just sucks. Streets of Rage 2, one of the best, absolute best beat 'em ups ever to come out. The variety is so good. The music's specifically is some of the best 16-bit music ever. And yeah, I think everyone knows Streets of Rage 2 as well. And probably people are tired of hearing it get so much praise, but frankly, it deserves it. But if I'm to be honest, Streets of Rage 4 that just came out on like modern systems might be better. Streets of Rage 4 is just absolutely amazing. Shame that there's no Streets of Rage 3 on here. I really like Streets of Rage 3, but yeah, if you're going to play any Streets of Rage, it's going to be 2, isn't it? Earthworm Jim, another classic game that everyone remembers, and everyone loves the mascot Earthworm Jim. The game itself, it's good. Don't get me wrong, it's classic. It's very 90s again. But it's kind of, I don't know. The levels are kind of a jumbled mess. But fortunately, it's not difficult, so it's pretty easy to get through. But playing it again, I don't know. I don't think it's aged that well. Earthworm Jim 2 is definitely better, but the first one is a classic. So Sonic the Hedgehog 2, this is my personal favorite Sonic game. Really, really good. I think we all know Sonic the Hedgehog 2. I actually like the music better in 2 as well than in the first one. And just overall an improvement on the first one. Plus, this is where they introduced the spin dash. A lot of people forget that the first one doesn't have spin dashing. And it's kind of essential to Sonic games now. Contra Hard Corps. This is also just an amazing Contra game. It's a side-scroller shooter. I think we all know Contra as well. In Europe, I think they censored this game and changed the title to something weird like Alien something, and there's like no humans in it, which is just strange. But overall, this is a really, really good Contra game. It's kind of weird. A lot of these franchises that are really well known on the Nintendo, like Contra and what else? Castlevania. The Genesis games are just kind of better, like even in some respects to the Super Nintendo games. Contra Hard Corps is far better than the Contra game on Super Nintendo. But yeah, definitely a good game. Very, very difficult. The hard in the title is no fucking joke. Landstalker is an isometric adventure game. That cover art is absolutely terrible and does not represent the graphics and style at all. It's very, very cartoony. Sort of Zelda-like, but not really. It's more of a isometric platformer than a standard RPG. It's pretty good. The isometric view gets really confusing though, so it's kind of hard to play nowadays. Beyond Oasis is a Zelda clone, like straight up. Top-down view with really huge sprites. Sword attack that's very similar to Zelda, and overall, yeah, it's a fantastic game, but it's a Zelda clone through and through. That cover art is also terrible. It doesn't represent the game at all. The game is very, well, it's very cartoony, and B, it's very kind of Arabian, so very Aladdin feel. So yeah, I recommend Beyond Oasis, but if you have someone denying it as a Zelda clone, they're talking out of their ass. Sonic Spinball. I really like Sonic Spinball. For some reason, people really hate Sonic Spinball. It's a pinball game using Sonic. Yeah, the physics of Sonic as the ball is just kind of whack, but I don't know. I really like this game for some reason. I like that it's a pinball game with very clear objectives. You can actually beat levels in this game. You're not just playing the same table over and over again for a high score. Vector Man. Play to win. Vector Man's a side-scroller shooter with very, very good graphics. Very advanced for the time. I don't know. I think it's all digitized, but it's very interesting looking. I wish they had Vector Man 2 on here. I think it's a better game, but the original Vector Man is really, really good and interesting. Everything's like made out of balls. It's kind of weird. Wonder Boy and Monster World. I never really liked Wonder Boy. Yeah, I don't know. I just don't really like Wonder Boy. I know a lot of people do. I think it's just a little too, not easy, kiddish maybe. I don't know. I just don't really like Wonder Boy. It's a side-scroller platformer, and I mean it's good if you like that, but not really for me. Ooh, Ghouls and Ghosts. This is one of my favorite games on the Genesis. Hard as balls, but very fair and a really, really good port of the arcade. It's one of the earlier Genesis games, so the sound and graphics are a little more primitive, but man, is it fun. The control is what makes it so good. You can like use diagonals to jump around and stuff, and that's very, very useful in Ghouls and Ghosts. Yeah, great game, highly recommended, and the cover art is like fantastic. Alex Kidd in the Enchanted Castle. I like the original Alex Kidd on the Master System more. This is okay. My problem with Alex Kidd is, I don't know, I never really liked the level design in Alex Kidd. It just felt kind of weird and meandering, but still a good game if you like side-scrollers. Golden Axe is I think we all know Golden Axe as well. It's a side-scroller beat-em-up with, you know, sort of Conan the Barbarian theme or Jason the Argonauts. It's okay, let's be honest. Golden Axe is kind of repetitive. You know, you fight the same enemies through the whole game. They're just different colors. And frankly, I wish they had put Golden Axe 2 or Golden Axe 3 on here, which I think 3 was only released in Japan, but the original is classic, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's not that fun, to be honest. Virtual Fighter 2 is shit on the Genesis. I mean, you don't really want to play Virtual Fighter 2. It hasn't aged well at all, but the Genesis version is absolutely terrible. I do not know why they put this on here. It's not really a classic on the Genesis. People really remember Virtua Fighter 2 from either the 32X or the Sega Saturn, but the Genesis version is just awful, awful fighting game. Alicia Dragoon, I'm glad they put this on here as well because this is also a very expensive cart. It's a side-scroller adventure game sort of thing. Really interesting graphics and mechanic. You have a pet dragon, well, you have several pet dragons that grant you different powers and they can die. So it's kind of a combination shmup and side-scroller. It's kind of interesting, but yeah, again, really glad they put this on here. It's not an easy game to find or buy. Columns is Sega's answer to Tetris at the time. It's okay. I don't really like Columns. I don't really like puzzle games in general, but I mean, Columns is okay. It's very straightforward. Match up 3 gems and get points. It's Bejeweled, essentially. But yeah, just not as good as Tetris. Phantasy Star 4, I'm glad that they put 4 on here and not 2. 2 is great, but 4 is definitely the best fantasy of the classic Phantasy Star games. 4 is definitely the best. This is an RPG through and through, like a very classic JRPG. And yeah, it's just fantastic, fantastic game. Highly recommend it. Also a pretty expensive cart to get. Not overly expensive, though. Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition, whatever. Street Fighter 2. Super Nintendo version is better. Wouldn't really recommend it on the Genesis. It's still fun. I mean, it's Street Fighter 2, but combination of having the 3-button controller and just not being a fantastic port, you can play it on something better. Mega Man and the Wily Wars, I don't think this was actually released in the US. This is actually Mega Man 1, 2, and 3 sort of remastered and put into one package, so there you go. If you don't know what Mega Man is, it's, well, look it up. Dynamite Heady. It's a very weird side-scroller platform. It's pretty good. I wish they put Decap Attack rather than Dynamite Heady. For some reason, when I think Dynamite Heady, I think Decap Attack, and when I think Decap Attack, I think Dynamite Heady, and I prefer Decap Attack. But in any case, still a good game. It's got kind of a weird mechanic where you use your head to destroy enemies. But that's actually the same mechanic as Decap Attack. Anyways, yeah, it's a good game. I would recommend it. Strider, with one of the absolute worst box arts ever. This is another early Genesis game. The graphics haven't aged very well. Neither has the sound or anything really, but the gameplay definitely holds up. You're basically, it's a side-scroller, again. There's a lot of side-scrollers on the Genesis and the 16-bit era. We all know that, but it's a side-scroller adventure game sort of thing with a guy with an unbelievably huge sword. The sword itself, it's small, but when he attacks, it takes up like the whole screen. But it's really, really fun. And it has a weird Russian theme, as you can see back there. Like, I think the main character Strider, right? That is his name, I believe. Is like Russian, but he's very clearly like a Japanese anime character. That's a fun game. Kid Chameleon is a fantastic platformer with a really unlikable main hero. The levels are very like Super Mario-ish, and the power-ups are also very Super Mario-ish, but the titular Kid Chameleon is just an unlikable mascot. I don't know. He doesn't say anything or anything, but he was probably like the king of Coolsville in the 90s. I mean, just look at him. But the actual character in the game for me is just, I don't know, it's not aesthetically pleasing, but still a good game. And let's see, almost done here. I could have sworn Mortal Kombat 2 was on here, wasn't it? Let's see, let me count this real quick. Nope, my memory is just that shit. There is no Mortal Kombat 2. I'll explain why I thought there was Mortal Kombat 2 here in a second, but anyways, down to the wire here with a few last games. Like Crusader, it's another isometric adventure game, very, very similar to Landstalker, like almost the exact same game. Very bad print of a bad box art, but it's still a fun game. I kind of like it better than Landstalker. It has more realistic graphics, and there's more going on in the levels rather than just platforming. Monster World 4. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty sure Monster World 4 never came out in the US, and this is a translation. This is also a really good game. It's a side-scroller adventure, as always, but it's actually like an RPG. You can save, and there's items to use, and yeah, it's more of an RPG than an actual side-scroller. Eternal Champions is a really, really shit fighting game. Again, I don't know why they put this on here. I think it's awful. I think a lot of people do think it's awful, but it's another, I guess it's a classic Genesis game. I don't know. I tend to see it on every single Genesis compilation, and I don't know. I don't like it. Road Rash 2, another one of my favorite Genesis games. Basically, it's a motorcycle racing game where you can just beat the shit out of the other racers with your fists and bats and chains, and yeah, it's really, really fun. Fucking hard as hell. Like, every time I hear someone talk about Road Rash 2, they just praise and praise it, and I feel like they've never gotten to stage 3, because stage 3 and upwards is just awful. It's so hard, and the game kind of runs like ass on an original Genesis, but on the Genesis Mini it runs really well, but it gets kind of unfairly hard. There, you got cars popping out of nowhere to crash you. The AI just beats the shit out of you and you alone. That's actually my big problem with Road Rash 2. The AI, while they can fuck up and crash into things, they never beat up each other. It's so annoying. They only beat up you. So it's got its flaws. It's not a perfect game, but it's just too much fun to talk shit about it. It's just great. And then you have two, so that's the 40 official Genesis games. Then you have two kind of interesting additions here. These are basically unreleased games that they put on here, and one of them is kind of controversial. So Tetris was apparently a version of Tetris that was fully done, fully developed, and ready to be released, but Nintendo called up Sega and said, fuck you, we own Tetris, you can't have Tetris. So it never actually came out on the Genesis, but here it is, and it's a good version of Tetris. It's Tetris. Doesn't have the music for Tetris, you know, classic music, but it's here. And then you have Darius. This is interesting as well. I believe this is actually like, it's a conversion of the arcade, and it, to be honest, it kind of sucks. I don't know, I don't really like Darius, and the version on this Genesis version is just weird. Everything's like way too big. But apparently, when this was coming out and people were first reviewing Darius, people were saying that it was actually a fan conversion that Sega had ripped off the internet and put on the Sega Mini. They didn't actually develop the conversion for the Mini. It was actually done by someone else. And then Sega turned around and said, no, that's a rumor, because the actual gameplay of this is very similar to the guy's port. And I think the guy himself came out and said, no, they didn't do that, or he was suspicious. I don't know. There's a long story behind it. I think in the end, it was actually done by Sega, they didn't just rip it off the internet, but I don't know the full story. But that's basically the story behind that. I mean, in the end, I don't know if it's really worth playing. If you like Darius, it's a decent enough conversion, but overall, There's a little promotional shot. 40 legendary games. All right, so yeah, the game selection, very, very good. Some notable missing titles like Shining Force 2 and Streets of Rage 3 and et cetera, et cetera. So, but overall, this is a pretty good tasting of what the Genesis was all about. Now, I really wish there were more obscure titles on here. My ideal Genesis mini release would be to release one just like this with all the games that everyone else knows, because let's be honest, I've played all these games so many fucking times on so many, like on the original Genesis and on a bunch of compilations that I want to play the obscure stuff. So I would release one just like this, then I would release another Genesis Mini that has a bunch of obscure games. You know, no Altered Beast, no Sonic, stuff, a Genesis with like stuff like War Song and Battletech and Truxton, stuff like that. Like really, like good Genesis games that are kind of hard to find and really obscure. That would be my ideal Genesis Mini release plan. I don't know how licensing would work that way. Like, for example, you have World of Illusion here and Mickey Mouse games, but there's no Aladdin, which was a really well-known Genesis game as well, but I don't know if there's some weird licensing going on with Disney there. But either way, that would be my Genesis ideal release. And there's also the problem that I really wish this was more comprehensive, because you've got a lot of middle games like Streets of Rage 2, and you got Sonic 1 and 2, but no 3, no Sonic and Knuckles, etc. And while this exists, excuse me, this also exists for the PS3 as well, and on PC, I believe. This is Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection. It really is the ultimate Genesis collection. I mean, this has everything, like every great Genesis game, and some. You can actually unlock a bunch of Master System games in this, and some weird arcade conversions and stuff like that. The problem is you don't get to play them with a Genesis controller, but if you get on PC, now that this exists, you can get the USB controller for it. And yeah, this is kind of what I would recommend. Oh fuck, they got Altered Beast on the back. I forgot about that. Anyways, yeah, like for example, they have all the Streets of Rages, all the Golden Axes, all the Sonics, I think except for Sonic and Knuckles. But in any case, yeah, this is just absolutely fantastic. And I wish the Mini was on this level of game completeness. But that doesn't really matter, because this is so unbelievably easy to hack that you can just put your entire Genesis library on here through ROMs. And that's why I was confused when I didn't see Mortal Kombat 2 on here, because I loaded it onto the system and saw it in the menu. Yeah, this thing is like, I mean, a monkey could hack this thing, and now I have like the entire Genesis, well, mostly the entire Genesis library on this thing. And you can also, there's a way to plug in extra storage, and you can put on different emulators on this thing. So if a certain game doesn't work with the built-in emulator, you can just use a different one. And you can play, I believe you can load it with Nintendo emulators as well. I haven't done that, I just kept it to Genesis. I don't want it tainted by Nintendo. But yeah, so if you're against that thing, I understand. But if you're not, this is like the easiest recommendation I can ever make for anyone who's interested in Genesis games or wants a little box that plays all your Genesis games. Because again, hacking this thing is just stupid easy. And of course, you can play a bunch of Japanese and European releases as well after you've hacked it. And yeah, it's just been fantastic ever since I jailbroke it essentially and loaded up all my games. So while this list is great, it doesn't really matter to me, because I've got all the ROMs I could ever want on this thing. And that is the Sega Genesis Mini. I highly recommend it if you want a Sega Genesis console that plays Sega Genesis games on your HD TV. It's built really, really well. The games are really, really good, and the emulation is perfect. So that's going to do it for me, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.